Montana Territory, June 1882. The first time Zachary Tolen saw her, she had a split lip and her wrists were bound with rope. He was standing under the blistering sun, dust clinging to his boots, watching the auction platform outside the mining camp saloon in Larkspur Ridge. The men around him were laughing, spitting, bidding. She stood silent still, her dress torn at the shoulder, not a tremble in her. Just those fierce, pale eyes staring back at everyone like she was already gone. Zachary did not come here to buy a woman. He came for supplies and to trade 2 mules. But when the man beside the girl, heavy in the gut, drunk and talking loud, jerked her arm like she was a sack of grain, something in Zachary split open. She's mine to sell. My wife ran off, left me with this mouthy brat. She owes me, so you want her or not? Zachary stepped forward slowly. How much? The drunk squinted at him. What's it to you, cowboy? I asked how much. The man spat. $50. Zachary reached into his coat, pulled out the pouch he had meant for winter goods. She comes with nothing, right? She ain't got a damn thing but that attitude. Good. Then she's mine now. The girl didn't flinch when Zachary handed over the money. She didn't speak when he cut the ropes from her wrists. She didn't thank him when he helped her down from the platform, but she looked at him, really looked, and that was enough. They rode out of Larkspur Ridge before nightfall, her on his second horse, silent as the moon climbing over the hills. Zachary did not talk much either. He was not a man who filled silences. Widowhood had carved most words out of him. His wife, Clara, had been gone 3 years now, fever taking her the winter after their second child was born. His son and daughter were waiting back at the ranch, and now so was she. By the 3rd hour on the trail, she finally spoke. You bought me, he nodded. I did. Why? Zachary glanced at her. She was riding steady, straight back despite the bruises. Because you needed out, and I had the coin to do it. She looked down at her hands. They were red where the rope had burned them. What if I run? You can. You will not stop me. No. She went quiet for a while, then softer. What's your name? Zachary Tolen. She looked at him again. Danica Faye. They rode in silence after that, the horses carrying them deeper into the open land. When they reached the ranch at dawn, Zachary unsaddled the horses while Danica stood near the corral, watching the valley unfold in the golden light. The house was small but solid, wood slats refitted last spring. 2 children burst out of the doorway, barefoot, 1 boy, 1 girl racing toward him. Ada, slow down, Zachary called gently. The girl, 5 and wild-eyed, latched onto his leg. The boy, 7, stopped short when he saw Danica. Who's she? He asked. Zachary crouched beside them. This is Miss Danica Faye. She's going to be staying with us for a while. You mind your manners. Danica crouched too slowly, her bruised face softening. Hello, she said. Ada looked up at her with wide eyes. Are you going to be our new mama? Zachary's stomach tensed. Danica blinked. Then she reached out and brushed a curl from Ada's cheek. No, sweetheart, I am just a guest. They spent the next few days falling into a pattern. Zachary worked the ranch. Danica helped where she could, cooking, sweeping, mending what needed mending. She never asked questions, she never raised her voice, but something in her began to ease. Her shoulders lost that tightness. She started humming when she peeled potatoes. Ada followed her everywhere. Even Andrew, cautious and quiet, began sitting beside her on the porch in the evenings. One night, after supper, Zachary watched her from the doorway. She was brushing Ada's hair while the child leaned against her knee, half asleep. You are good with them, Zachary said. Danica glanced up. I was the oldest of 5, raised my youngest sister like she was mine. You miss them, she nodded. Gone now, fever took them too, one by one. Then my father drank himself into debt and married me off to that man. I was 16. Zachary's hands curled into fists. I am sorry. She looked at him, calm and steady. You did not know. He stepped forward, leaning against the frame. You can stay here as long as you want. I will not ask anything of you. Danica looked down at Ada, who had fallen asleep in her lap. Her voice was soft. You already gave me more than anyone ever has. Zachary left her alone after that, but something in him stayed awake that night. The next morning, she was out before sunrise, kneeling by the creek, washing clothes. Zachary stepped down from the porch with his rifle slung over his back. You do not have to do all that, he said. She looked up, water dripping from her fingers. I want to. He hesitated, then sat beside her on the rocks. The air was cool, the grass wet. "You are not used to being looked after, are you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one ever did." Zachary picked up a shirt and started wringing it out beside her. "Maybe it is time someone did." Her eyes met his, surprised, but she did not look away. Later that week, he found her standing in the barn, her hand on the neck of his old gelding. She was humming, soft and low, and the horse leaned into her. "You like him?" he asked. She smiled, not wide, not showy, but real. "He is gentle." "Like you." Danica turned to him. "I am not gentle, you are kind, that is better." She looked at the floor. "You do not know what I have done to survive." Zachary stepped closer. "I do not care, you are safe now." Her hand brushed his on the horse's bridle. She looked up at him, and he saw something shift in her eyes. Not fear, not defense, hope. That night, while the children slept in the room next to theirs, Zachary lit a lamp and sat on the porch. Danica came out and sat beside him. "I think I want to stay," she said quietly. He turned to her. "You can." She looked at the stars for a long time before whispering, "I feel like I can breathe here." He reached for her hand. She let him. They sat in silence, hands clasped, the night settling soft around them. And for the first time in years, both of them felt like they were home. By late July, the pastures baked hard under the Montana sun, and the hills behind the ranch had turned the color of old parchment. Mule deer passed through some mornings, their shadows long across the sagebrush. Danica had taken to rising early, long before the children stirred, and preparing the morning fire before Zachary came in from checking the fence lines. One morning, she was kneeling at the hearth, coaxing heat from a stubborn ember when he came through the door, smelling of dry grass and sweat. He set his hat on the hook. "I found a calf tangled in the north wire, must have slipped the herd last night." She closed the stove door and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is it hurt?" "No, worse than a scrape. I freed it." She poured hot water into the basin and turned to him. "You should let me come along sometime. I could help." He studied her face, the way her jaw tightened against doubt. "You've got nothing to prove, Danica." "I know," she said, "but I still want to pull my weight." He nodded once. "Tomorrow morning." "We'll ride out before dawn." The next day, she met him by the barn with her boots cinched and her braid tied tight. He handed her a saddlebag and gestured to the roan mare. "She's sure-footed." Slow to spook. They rode side by side through the creek bed, up into the higher meadows where the cattle grazed. The air smelled of pine and dust, and Danica gripped the reins with steady hands. She didn't speak until they reached the ridge. "How long have you lived on this land?" 7 years. "Bought it after the war ended. It was just hills and scrub back then. Built the house with Clara." She didn't speak, but her expression shifted, something softer, not pity but understanding. "You ever dream of leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "This land's honest. It gives what it can and asks the same." She nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." They rode in silence for a while, the horses picking their way through the grass. At the far fence, Zachary dismounted to check a broken post. Danica held the reins, watching a hawk circle overhead. "You miss the sea?" he asked without looking up. She blinked. "What makes you think I've seen the sea?" Your voice changes when you talk about far-off places, like you've been there. "I haven't, but my mother used to sing about it. She was from Boston. Said the wind there had salt in it." He met her eyes. "She's still alive?" "No, she died when I was 8. After that, it was just Pa and the cold." Zachary straightened and brushed off his hands. "You talk about her like she stayed with you." She did. "In songs and things she taught me." "I still remember the way she braided my hair, always started from the left." They rode home when the sun slipped past its peak. That evening, Danica sat on the porch mending a torn shirt, her needle precise. Zachary joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, one for each of them. He handed her the warm tin cup and sat back in the chair beside her. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I was thinking about Andrew. He asked me this morning if I could read stories like his teacher used to." Zachary raised a brow. "Can you?" She nodded. "My mother taught me. I used to read everything I could find. Then maybe you could help him. He struggles with his letters." She smiled faintly. "I'd like that." The porch settled into hush, the kind that only came when the wind died down and the crickets hadn't yet begun. He watched her thread the needle again. "Do you ever think about what you'd do next?" he asked. "If you weren't here." She didn't answer right away. Then I did 100 times, but now I'm not sure I want to think that far ahead. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why not? She looked at him, eyes steady. Because I don't want to leave. Zachary held her gaze. The last of the light caught her face, made her look almost golden in the fading day. He didn't say anything. Just reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. Inside, Ada called out in her sleep. Danica stood without a word and went in. Later, after the house had gone quiet again, Zachary found her sitting by the stove, her hands resting in her lap. He stood in the doorway. I keep waiting for this to disappear, she said softly. It won't. How can you be sure? He stepped into the room, slow. Because you're not the only one who feels it. Danica rose. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. She just took his hand and held it for a long moment. Then she let it go, turned, and climbed the stairs to her room. Zachary stood there, alone but not lonely, the warmth of her hand lingering. He'd known pain and silence and the long ache of missing someone who would never come back. But this was something else entirely, not a replacement, not a rescue. Something growing from the steadiness of shared ground, something true. The first frost came early that year. By the middle of September, the aspens in the gulch behind the barn had turned gold, and the mornings tasted of smoke and iron. Zachary had started chopping wood in the evenings, stacking it in neat cords near the porch. Danica watched from the doorway one night, arms crossed, sleeves rolled to her elbows. You're favoring your left shoulder, she said. He didn't stop swinging the axe. Old wound. Took a bullet outside Franklin, Tennessee, never healed right. She stepped down into the yard. You should let me take a look. Zachary set the axe aside and wiped his brow with his sleeve. It's not much to see. Danica lifted his arm gently, fingers pressing below the collarbone. You've been working through it too long. Sit. He did, on the edge of the chopping stump, while she stepped into the house and returned with a tin of salve. She knelt beside him, unscrewing the lid. The scent of pine resin drifted in the air. You mixed that yourself? He asked. I did. Juniper and bear grease. It helps with deep aches. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, rubbing the salve into the muscle with slow, firm strokes. Zachary winced once, then let out a breath he hadn't meant to hold. You've done this before, he murmured. Danica nodded. My uncle was a trapper. Came home bruised more often than whole. I learned what I had to. He turned his head slightly. You don't speak of him much. There wasn't much to speak of. He died on the trail between Helena and Deer Lodge. I got word from a peddler 2 winters after. Her voice carried no blame, but the weight of it settled between them. When she finished, she wiped her hands and sat back on her heels. You'll feel it less by morning. Zachary stood slowly, testing the stretch. I believe you. The days shortened, and the rhythm of the ranch turned with the season. Danica began teaching Andrew and Ada in the afternoons, seated at the table with chalk and slates salvaged from the schoolhouse in Bozeman. She showed Andrew how to form his letters with care and taught Ada to count using pebbles from the creek. One afternoon, Zachary lingered by the doorway, his arms folded, watching Danica guide Andrew's hand over the letter R. You've got patience, he said. Danica didn't look up. He listens better when he's not being watched. Zachary smiled, then caught himself and stepped back outside. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Danica stood by the window with a wool shawl wrapped around her. The moonlight caught the edge of her cheekbone. You always walk the fence this late? She asked without turning. Some nights, coyotes have been pushing closer. She turned then. I can come with you. Zachary paused. You don't have to, I know. I want to. They walked the edge of the north pasture in silence, boots crunching over frost-stiff grass. He carried the lantern, and she kept one hand tucked into her coat. I used to dream of land like this, she said. Wide and quiet, no eyes watching. He glanced at her. Do you still dream of it? No, now I stand in it. They crossed the dry bed of the creek, and she caught his arm as she stepped over a loose stone. When she didn't let go, he didn't ask her to. When they reached the far gate, she leaned against the post and looked out toward the hills. You ever think about what comes next? Zachary rested the lantern on the top rail. Only when it's quiet enough. She looked at him then. And what do you hear? He met her gaze, steady. You, mostly. For a long heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she reached up and touched his face, her hand rough from work but warm. "I never thought I'd feel safe enough to want someone again." "You don't have to rush," he said. "I'm not rushing. I'm just not afraid anymore." Zachary leaned in slowly, watching for any sign she wasn't ready. But she tilted her chin toward him, and when their mouths met, it was soft and certain, like the end of a long silence. They stood like that for a while, the lantern flickering beside them, the pasture quiet under the moon. When they returned to the house, they didn't speak. Zachary bolted the door and Danica lit the lamp low. She reached for his hand and he followed her upstairs. They lay beside each other in the small bed that had once been too empty. Neither said the words out loud, but they didn't have to. The way she curled into his chest, the way he wrapped his arm around her side, both spoke of a trust earned slow and sure. Outside, the wind stirred the eaves. Inside, they slept with the steadiness of people who had nothing left to run from. The wind changed near the end of October. It came down from the mountains sharp and dry, stirring grit through the yard and snapping the last of the sunflowers at the fence. Inside the house, Zachary fixed the seals along the window frames while Danica stitched a new lining into Ada's coat. The days were shorter now, the air holding more bite than warmth. One afternoon, Andrew came in from the barn with a splinter in his palm and a question in his eyes. "Miss Danica, can I ask you something?" Danica set down her thread. "Of course." He held out his hand. "Did you ever ride in a wagon train?" She glanced up as she eased the splinter free. "No, but I once traveled 5 days on foot beside one." "Why?" "Mr. Lyle at church says folks out west all came that way." "That everybody's got some piece of a story like that." Zachary, working at the stove, glanced over but said nothing. Danica smiled faintly. "Some did, some didn't. Stories don't always follow the same road." Andrew nodded like he meant to remember that. That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, Zachary found Danica folding linens by the hearth. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I saw the way you spoke to him." She looked up. "He's starting to ask bigger things. He trusts you." "They both do." Danica smoothed the fold on a pillowcase. "It's something I try not to take lightly." Zachary stepped closer. "You don't." She set the linens aside, then turned to face him. "I've been thinking about winter, about what it means to stay." He waited. "I want to help more than just around the house," she said. "I can start preserving food, putting up jars, drying herbs. I know how to keep things through the cold." "You don't need to ask." He reached for her hand. "Whatever you want to take on, I'll stand behind you." Danica looked down at their joined hands. "I lived too long under someone who made everything feel like a debt. I need to know this is a life I'm building, not one I'm borrowing." Zachary's voice was low. "Then we build it together." The next morning, Danica cleared space in the root cellar and began sorting through the bins of apples and late squash. She worked with sleeves rolled and hair tied tight, humming a tune Zachary hadn't heard before, soft, unfamiliar, but sure. She set up shelves along the back wall, placing jars of honey and sacks of flour in neat rows. Later that week, a man rode up from town, Wyatt Hensley, who ran the feed store in Bozeman. He brought a parcel of seeds and a letter from the town council asking Zachary to attend a meeting about land disputes west of the ridge. "Some folks been pushing past the markers," Wyatt said. "Think they can take more than they've earned." Zachary nodded. "I'll go." As Wyatt mounted to leave, his gaze flicked toward Danica, who stood on the porch with Ada beside her. "That your new housekeeper?" he asked. Danica's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Zachary's answer came without hesitation. "She's part of this family." "That's all anyone needs to know." Wyatt tipped his hat and rode off, leaving dust behind him. That night, Danica sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. Zachary joined her, lowering himself to sit beside her in the dark. "I'm sorry for how he spoke," he said. "I've heard worse," she replied. "But thank you." He looked out across the yard where the barn lantern flickered against the dark. "I don't want anyone thinking you're less than what you are." She turned toward him. "And what is that? Strong, capable." "And more than I deserve." She reached over and took his hand. "You don't get to decide what you deserve. I do, and I want this." Zachary's voice caught. So do I. The days that followed were full of quiet preparations. Danica taught Ada to use a spindle while Zachary repaired the barn roof. Andrew carved wooden buttons for Danica's sewing chest, bringing them to her wrapped in cloth with a shy pride. One evening, after the first snow dusted the far hills, Danica came in from the yard with red cheeks and a bundle of dried sage in her arms. "We'll burn some in the hearth," she said, "to bless the house before the worst of winter sets in." Zachary took the bundle from her hands. "You believe in that?" "I believe in honoring what's kept me alive," he nodded. "Then let's honor it." That night they sat before the fire, the children curled beneath quilts, the scent of sage drifting through the beams. Danica leaned into Zachary's shoulder and he rested his cheek against her hair. Neither spoke. Words weren't needed. They had built something together slow, solid, and rooted deep. And it was holding. Snow had begun to settle in the quiet shadows beneath the cottonwoods, clinging soft to the low fence rails and blanketing the slope behind the barn. The porch roof held a thin crust of ice, and the creak behind the house moved slower each day, its voice low and muffled beneath the brittle edges. Zachary tightened the cinch on the mare's saddle, breath clouding in the cold morning as Danica stepped out to meet him with a wrapped bundle in her arms. "You'll take the rye bread for the tanners," she said, holding it out. "They'll be glad of it. Haven't had a good harvest since the hail." She tucked her hands into her coat as he secured the bundle to the saddlebag. "You'll be back before nightfall?" "Before dusk if the pass stays open." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on his face longer than was needed. He reached up and touched her cheek, the wool of his glove brushing her skin. "You'll have company," he said. "Mrs. Braddock's sending her boy over to help Andrew Hall feed from the shed. He'll stay through the afternoon." Danica's shoulders eased a little. "Thank you." He pressed his lips to her forehead, brief and warm. Then he mounted and rode out, the mare's hooves muffled by snow. Inside, Ada traced letters near the stove while Danica scrubbed carrots at the basin. The house held a hush that came with deep winter wood creaking in the walls, the occasional pop of drying sap in the fire. When the boy from the Braddock homestead arrived, Danica handed him a bowl of stew and asked him to stay near the children while she went to the cellar to sort the last of the winter pears. She lit a lantern and descended the stairs, breath ghosting in the chilled air. The cellar smelled of earth and apples, and as she moved through the bins, she found 2 jars of plum preserves she hadn't realized were left. She smiled, thinking of Zachary's quiet fondness for them, how he always saved them for the last bite of bread. Upstairs, the front door creaked open too soon for Zachary. Danica's hand paused on the jar. She set it down and climbed the stairs quietly. A tall man stood just inside the threshold, boots dripping from the snow. His coat was patched at the shoulders and his face bore the scrape of hard living. His eyes moved over the room and landed on her. "Name's Merritt," he said. "Looking for a man called Tolen." "He's not here," Danica said evenly. "Rode out early." Merritt stepped further in. "He's the one bought you off my cousin in Larkspur Ridge, ain't he?" Danica's spine straightened. "He is. You run out on family, they don't forget. I came to collect what's owed." She didn't flinch. "There's nothing owed, not to you, not to him." He took another step. "You think a piece of paper and a preacher's words make that true?" Danica glanced toward the back room where the children waited. Her voice never rose. "You need to leave." He reached for her arm, but before he could touch her, the door behind him slammed open in a gust of wind and snow. Zachary stepped inside, rifle slung but unshouldered, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Let go of her," he said. Merritt turned, startled, hand dropping. "Didn't come to cause trouble." "You did." Zachary's voice was low, final. "You'll ride out now." "If I ever see you near her again, I won't speak first." Merritt hesitated, then spat on the floor and backed out, muttering under his breath. The door shut behind him with a hollow thud. Danica hadn't moved. Zachary crossed to her and cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing her jaw. "You all right?" She nodded once, but her breath shook. "He won't come back." "No," Zachary said. "He won't." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Danica stood at the window watching the snow fall in slow spirals. Zachary came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. I should have been here, he said. You were, she said. You always are. She turned to face him. I don't want to live looking over my shoulder. You won't have to. Danica reached up and unbuttoned the front of his coat, her hands steady. Then let's stop waiting. Zachary kissed her, deep and sure, not hurried, not cautious, just full of the quiet certainty they'd earned together. They married in the parlor on the first warm day of March, when the snow had begun to melt from the fields and the creek sang again. Mrs. Braddock brought wildflower jam, and the Tanner family sent a quilt stitched from their late daughter's fabric scraps. Andrew wore his best boots, and Ada insisted on tying a blue ribbon in Danica's braid. Zachary stood straight in a clean shirt, holding Danica's hand as the minister spoke the words. They said their vows with eyes locked, no hesitation in either voice. Afterward, Danica carried a basket out to the back fence and spread a cloth for the four of them. They ate bread and honey, and Zachary told Ada she could plant her own row of carrots come spring. That night, wrapped in one another beneath a quilt stitched with wildflowers, Danica whispered into the hush, I never thought I'd find peace like this. Zachary kissed her temple, his voice low against her skin. It was always waiting for you. Years passed. The house grew fuller with new laughter and worn wood. Danica's hands stayed busy teaching, tending, pulling new life from soil. Zachary's hair turned gray at the temples, and he carried their child on his shoulders through the pasture, pointing out hawks and cottonwoods. They never spoke of the past again. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held them. They had built a life from the quiet, from the steadiness of each other. And it held through winters and seasons and all the small, unwavering days that followed. They grew old together in the valley, side by side, never once letting go.